Hey, how you doing? I can save a lot of time if you'll allow me to read this one page of notes. I can save a whole lot of time as opposed to ad-libbing or trying to be spontaneous. And then at the end of this video, I can get to the stuff that I didn't have time to include in yesterday's video, because yesterday's video ran really long. So let me read this, and then I'll get to the good stuff. In my previous video, Tone Lining number 1A, I tried to justify the use of new terms, new words, to designate orchestral lines of music. Back when I was doing research for this offbeat project, that is, back when I was reading almost every book that I could find on orchestration, I remembered the words of the Italian composer Otorino Respighi. He said, "The Italian genius is for melody and clarity." And if you listen with an open mind to the Italian orchestral literature, that is, their collective body of work, including their contemporary popular music, you might think that this is true. So, being half Italian myself, I took the liberty of rearranging Respighi's words in such a way that it would help me finalize my concept. After much meditation on this topic, I realized that my goal would be to come up with terminology and the attendant concept that would provide the student and composer with one thing. And here it is: clarity in designation of the respective relations of orchestral lines of music one to another. In other words, I'm trying to create or find or help you find clarity in designation of the respective relations of orchestral lines one to another. This mental exercise, this project for me, wasn't just about assigning new names. Anybody can do that. This goal, if reached, would at the very least allow a given composition teacher to engender in his or her students clarity, not solely in the choice or placement of tones, but in the underlying relation of any given line of tones to any other given line. That is, I sort of looked at the problem from a non-musical perspective, or you might say from a mathematical perspective. Yes, I do know that professional composers, orchestrators, and teachers know the intended meaning of the traditional phrases unison doubling and octave doubling. That's the ones I talked about, the ones I don't care for. In other words, they know what these things mean. It's second nature for them. I get it. There's no pressing need to introduce or change any terms. But after hundreds of years of using the same terms, especially when those terms are inaccurate, it really won't hurt anyone to consider an upgrade. In this case, with my system, a downright correction. From my concept, which I call tone lining, I chose the word lining. The word line means to depict with lines. Lining, the present participle, could then be read as depicting with lines. As such, we have a definition: tone lining, depicting tones with lines. As the phrase orchestral lines is far too general and commonplace, the phrase tone lining will suggest something not only new but more specific, something to a degree dedicated. When I was researching for this challenge, the first term to catch my eye, that is the first traditional term to really annoy me, was octave doubling. That's the one that really annoyed me. I perceived immediately that the phrase was far too broad. Worse yet, it was semantically incorrect. That is, too many liberties have been taken with this phrase. Granted, in the line an octave above or below the referent line, notes could be doubled. That is, the octave line might be played by more than one instrument, thereby yielding some form of doubling. But beyond that, there is no doubling, and in a few minutes I'll go over that quickly. Even if you use the phrase octave duplication, you'd still be speaking vaguely. Take this, for example. If your viola section played an alto line of notes, true octave duplication would be affected only if your violin one section played an octave above that viola part, and your violin 2 section played a line 1 octave above that viola part. I know that most people really don't like to seriously think about anything. But if you think deeply on these two phrasal terms, unison doubling and octave doubling, okay, you'll see how inappropriate they are. If you use sound reasoning, and that's a double entendre and a pun, sound reasoning, you'll come to understand what I've been saying. Again, as I've said many times before in my other videos, I simply can't believe that in the history of Western music, it takes literally hundreds of years for anyone to discover how inaccurate or inadequate select terms or practices really are. It's just incredible how much time has to transpire before someone says, hey, that's a bunch of crap, let's fix it. It's sort of like the way governments work. Nothing really ever gets fixed, right? So, okay, now, that was the part I was reading off this paper. Just to save time, you can go back and review that, but there's a few good points in there. Now, quickly, moving on to why I don't like specifically the terms unison doubling and octave doubling, I'll kind of say what I said in my previous video. Here's unison doubling. And that's going to happen, let me stand up, only in this case here. Like, let's say you have a flute and a second flute. So this line that the flute one's playing will be doubled by the second flute. And even down here with an entire violin section, let's say violin section 1. Doubling will happen with your first two instruments, but beyond that, you have tripling, quadrupling, quintupling, and you have all those ings, you see? So when it comes to unison doubling, the old term, the old way, it's only appropriate in certain cases. Now you can say, okay, well, Joey, no. Look at this. There's a flute and the clarinet's playing the same notes in unison. You say, well, that's doubling. Well, it is. But these are instruments of two different tone colors. So yes, you will be playing the same notes, the same line, but you're going to have two different tone colors. Now that doesn't matter. Most composers know intuitively, it's second nature, how to write and how to combine instruments. But I'm talking about terms, terminology. So down here you kind of have the same thing with you have a violin 1 section, violin 2. You're going to have all kinds of duplications here, far more than doubling. It's just, doubling's a crappy word to use. So that's a review of the old term is unison doubling and mine is called unison lining. That's the difference. Now, if we quickly move on to the old, let's say the old term octave doubling, I replace that with octave lining. Now here you see if the violin 2 section plays the alto part, all right, you can write a lining an octave above, let's say in the soprano range for the violin 1 section, and you would have octave lining. But there's no doubling here. The only doubling of a line, only doubling of tones would be within each given section. See violin 2? There'd be doubling, tripling, quadrupling, or whatever of the notes. And same way up here, there would be doubling, tripling, or quadrupling. But in relation to each other, there's no doubling. Same way down here. And I spoke incorrectly in my previous video. The cellos would play in the tenor range, play a line, and the basses in this example would play an octave lower. But again, you can have more than one bass. There could be doubling, tripling, quadrupling. Same way with the cellos. Doubling, tripling, quadrupling. But in relation to each other, there isn't any doubling. So, octave doubling is a crappy term. It's a crappy phrase. Octave lining's better. All right, so let's quickly move along so you don't leave me. Now, I showed in the previous video, 1A, I talked about unison doubling, octave doubling, and you say, well, you say, Joey, you showed me this paper, and you went on, and you say some of it I understood, some of it I didn't. You talked about tone lining, and there was 5 different types of tone lining that I have conjured up, right? You say, well, you know what? You can take that a little farther. You can refine that more. That's true. That's absolutely true. But I didn't put any more refinements in my book, because if I go too deep, just like these videos, if I go too deep and talk too much, I lose my audience. So I want to tell you what I did think. I want you to give me a little credit here. What I did think about this. I refer to this as simplified or basic tone lining, okay? Just the simplified basic version, because first of all, it's new, it's radical, and I don't want to lose my audience. I don't want to lose prospective musicians who might actually think, hey, you know, I like that. I'm going to talk like that. When I write my music, I'm going to think along these lines. Okay? So that's as deep as I went. But here's the beautiful thing. You can go deeper. In this video, I'm going to show you the next level in 1 minute. And then in the next video after this, I'd like to show you an even deeper level. In the first level, previous video, all right, we were on the strictly musical level. Now, we're moving to the mathematical level, and in the next video, 1C, we're going to move to a philosophical level. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, for those who are interested. So if we move to the second level, you could say, well, you know what, Joey, what you really have here is a 4-class tone lining system. 4-class tone lining. And then somebody say, oh no, he showed us 5 types of tone lining. But these are the basic simplified forms. When you move to the 4-class level of tone lining, all right, what you get is this. If you can see this, what you get is you have really only 4 classes of tone lining, or writing lines of tone for orchestra. You have your solo. All right, we talked about solo. That was real simple, not complicated. And that's kind of an independent line of music. It can stand alone. It's good by itself. Sounds good by itself. And then you have the second class, the superimposed. And that would be the unison lining that I talked about. Unison. Basically tone on tone. Same note on paper. The same tone sounds in the air when they play it. But that's dependent. That's relative. In other words, one line of tones that you hear is relative to the other line of tones being played at the same time. So here you see we have solo, superimposed. Then we have what I called parallel lining. And I didn't tell you this because I took too long. It's hard to go fast. All right? But then you have parallel lining, which is the 3rd class. And those intervals I showed you yesterday, see, I showed you examples of how you can do parallel lining with thirds, the 6th, interval of 6th, but I didn't go any deeper because I didn't have time. But in essence, those parallel lines can be written at any interval, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, octaves. So you see, octave lining, which is under the, which is under the basic system, is a separate form of lining. That's under the basic system. But if you go to the second level, the more advanced thinking, if you think deeper, go a little deeper, you see that octave lining is just like the other intervals. It's still a form of parallel lining, and it's dependent, because each one of these lines, each one of these parallel lines, let's say in this example, these 2 parallel lines are relative to the referent line. You see, they're relative. So we move then quickly to the 4th class, which is continuous, and that's the alternating or alternating instrument lining. And this is what we call the long line in music. Composers write a long line. They want the line, when you pass from instrument to instrument, you want it to be smooth and beautiful, and you want that aural blend to be so sweet you can't stand it. Like, listen to the orchestrations on a lot of Gino Vanelli's newer CDs, the ones that use full orchestra. The blending is just beautiful. Anyway, but you see here, again, this is an independent line of tones because it's not relying on, it's not connected to, intimately connected to any other lines. So if you really want to go deep, when you're considering your 4-class tone lining, all right, what you actually end up really is with only 2 main classes, and that would be your independent, okay, which would be the solo and the continuous class or category, let's say. And then your second class would be your dependent, which would be your superimposed and your parallel. God, I hope I'm speaking right. After I watch this back when I'm done, I always find mistakes. So you see, we went from a basic system. That's why the second video here. We went from the basic system from the first video to a deeper, what I call 4-class system. We went from that. But if you like to think, if you're one of those human beings in America who likes to think, you'll see, if you look at it, that you really only have 2 classes. And that was the whole point I've been trying to make on these videos, my accordion videos and my music videos. The whole point is if you look at something long enough and you meditate and you see a room for improvement or to make it a little better, whatever, and you got to go for it. Otherwise, we wouldn't have all these great inventions and modern stuff if you just don't go for it. And that's it. I hope that wasn't too horrible. And I'll come back, I think one more time with tone lining 1C, and I'll show you how we can take this, actually literally take this into a deeper level, a philosophical level. I don't think I'll scare anybody, but I'll let you be the judge. So thank you for being incredibly patient, and hope to see you soon. Good night.